I want you to take a second and just picture something for me. Like, literally, close your eyes if you have a moment.
Okay, I'm playing along.
So when you think of the very first non-native settler to step off a ship and, set up a permanent life in New York or Mannahatta, as it was known then, what image instantly pops into your head?
I mean, I know exactly what everyone is picturing right now.
Right. If you are like most people, you have this very specific, deeply ingrained character in mind. You're seeing like a European colonist.
Yeah, the classic pilgrim look.
Exactly. They are probably wearing heavy wool clothing, maybe one of those austere, stiff white collars. And almost certainly they are wearing one of those tall black hats with a prominent silver buckle right on the front.
Yeah, the Thanksgiving special uniform.
We've seen it in every textbook since we were kids. So do you have that image in your mind? Good. Now I want you to take that image and throw it completely out the window.
You really have to. It's such a pervasive myth. But the historical reality of who actually established that first foothold is, it's incredibly different. And honestly, it is infinitely more fascinating than some puritanical guy in a buckled hat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a story that has been buried for, over 400 years?
Yeah, over 4 centuries.
Crazy. So our mission for this deep dive is to look at the life of a man named Juan Rodrigues. He was the actual first non-native settler of Manhattan, and he arrived way back in the winter of 1613.
That's right.
Today, we are going to uncover this forgotten origin story, decode a centuries-old maritime mystery, and really learn how historians have to aggressively read between the lines of dusty archives just to find the truth.
And to do that, we have to start by grounding ourselves in the reality of the source material you and I are looking at today. Because when people think of early 17th century history, they often imagine, pristine, meticulously carved monuments.
Oh, yeah. Like grand royal charters preserved under glass in a museum.
Exactly. But that is not what we are dealing with here at all. The sources for Juan Rodrigues' life are messy, mundane 17th century notary records from Amsterdam.
Right, just everyday paperwork.
Yeah, we are talking about ink-stained depositions regarding business squabbles.
Yeah.
But what's amazing is that these fragile pieces of paper reveal an Atlantic world in the 1600s that was vastly more multicultural, complex, and deeply interconnected than the standard history books ever taught us.
For sure. And the absolute star of this messy archive is Juan Rodrigues himself. Let's look at his background, because he essentially embodies that interconnected Atlantic world you just mentioned.
He really does.
So he was an Atlantic Creole born in Santo Domingo.
Which is in the present-day Dominican Republic.
Right. And he had a West African mother and a Portuguese father. He operated as a free man, a merchant, and crucially for his survival, he was a master linguist.
That is the key right there. Language was his primary currency. You have to remember, in the 17th century Atlantic, empires were constantly clashing.
Just constant turf wars.
Exactly, and borders were incredibly fluid.
Uh-huh.
So being a polyglot meant you held the keys to trade and diplomacy. Rodrigues spoke Spanish, he spoke Portuguese, he picked up Dutch from interacting with maritime traders in the Caribbean.
Wow, so he's just absorbing languages as he goes.
Pretty much. And eventually, he learned the language of the Munsee Lenape, the native inhabitants of the Manhattan area. If you couldn't communicate in this era, you were entirely at the mercy of those who could.
And Rodrigues made sure he was the one facilitating the conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
But the way his linguistic skills actually enter the historical record is wild. I mean, we don't have a grand biography written about him by a contemporary. We only know he exists because of what essentially boils down to a petty workplace grievance.
It really is just an HR dispute at its core.
Right. The primary records of his life come from a bitter legal dispute in Amsterdam in 1614 between two Dutch sea captains, Theseus Mossel and Adrian Block.
And we really need to understand the stakes of that dispute to understand why Rodrigues was even mentioned in the first place. So in the early 1610s, Europe was going through what historians call the Little Ice Age.
It was freezing.
It was absolutely freezing. And the demand for thick, warm animal pelts, specifically beaver pelts, was skyrocketing. The fur trade was like one of the most lucrative industries on the planet at the time.
It was big money.
Huge money. So Mossel and Block were rival captains, and they were competing viciously for the same geographic dominance and the same fur trade monopolies in the Hudson Valley.
Basically cutting each other's throats for beaver pelts.
Yeah, they were sabotaging each other, undercutting prices, and essentially engaging in a maritime turf war that they eventually dragged all the way back to the notary courts in Amsterdam.
And buried in the depositions of this intense corporate rivalry over these pelts, we find the timeline of Juan Rodrigues. The court papers show that Captain Mossel brought Rodrigues aboard his ship, the Young Cobayas, back in Hispaniola in 1612. Mossel hired him specifically as a translator for the voyage, so they sail up the North American coast, and in the winter of 1613, they arrive at the island of Manhattan. At this point, get this, Rodrigues takes a look at the situation, assesses his options, and just flat out refuses to get back on the Dutch ship.
I love this part. From the perspective of Captain Mossel and his crew, Rodrigues goes completely rogue. They
Yeah.
fully expected him to stay a subordinate employee and, return to Europe with them.
But instead, he decides to plant his flag right there.
Right there on Manhattan.
He just terminates his own contract.
Yeah.
But here's the detail that I find so fascinating. He doesn't just quietly slip away into the woods. He demands his back pay.
Yep.
And he doesn't ask for European silver coins or Dutch currency, which, let's be honest, would have been completely useless to him in North America. He specifically demands his severance package in trade goods. The records tell us he walked away with 80 hatchets, a quantity of knives, and a musket.
And that decision, that specific ask, tells us everything about how deeply he understood the economics of the New World.
Because he wasn't just grabbing random supplies on his way out.
No, not at all. He was reading the local market perfectly. For the Munsee Lenape, European currency held zero value, but a steel hatchet. That was an immense technological leap.
Oh, for sure.
It revolutionized woodworking, clearing land, hunting. Iron and steel were the ultimate commodities. By demanding 80 hatchets, Rodrigues was instantly securing his position as a high-value merchant. He knew exactly what he needed to trade directly with the Lenape on his own terms.
It is the ultimate modern HR dispute playing out in 1613. You have this highly skilled independent contractor terminating his employment, demanding his back pay, and taking a severance package of 80 hatchets to start his own competing business.
It really is.
When you look at how we view the founding of New York today, as the ultimate global merchant empire, it didn't start with some dignified royal decree. It literally started with a guy telling his boss he was quitting and taking the inventory with him.
It perfectly illustrates the tension of his existence, too. The Dutch colonial powers viewed him as rebellious and insubordinate. But when we look back with a historical lens, he is clearly a pioneer.
Yeah, total trailblazer.
He leveraged a multicultural identity, his African heritage, his European languages, his Caribbean upbringing, to forge ties with the Native Americans. He belonged to all of these overlapping cultures, but he refused to be controlled by any of them.
And that independent streak makes perfect sense when you start looking into his origins, which brings us to a fascinating shift in how historians have to analyze these sources.
Right, the detective work part of it.
Exactly. Because we know what the legal documents explicitly say about his actions in Manhattan, but we also have to examine what those documents heavily imply about his past. And it all revolves around one single demographic detail recorded by the Dutch notaries.
Just one word.
Just one word. They noted that Rodrigues' father was Portuguese. Now today, you hear someone say their father is Portuguese, it just means they're from Portugal.
Sure, it's just a nationality now.
But in the Atlantic world of the early 1600s, that term carried a very different, very dangerous weight.
It really did. It was a highly loaded demographic marker back then. To understand the mechanics of why, we have to look at the geopolitical map of the Iberian Peninsula at the time.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, from 1580 to 1640, Portugal and Spain were united under a single crown, which is a period known as the Iberian Union. And when the Spanish crown absorbed Portugal, they brought the full, terrifying bureaucratic apparatus of the Inquisition with them.
And the Inquisition wasn't just some vague religious tension, it was a highly organized surveillance state.
Precisely. It was a nightmare. The Inquisition was ruthlessly hunting down a group known as conversos.
And those
were Jewish people who had been forcibly converted to Catholicism by the state. The authorities suspected that many of these new Christians were actually crypto-Jews, meaning they were publicly attending Mass, but secretly practicing Judaism behind closed doors.
Wow.
Yeah, and the Inquisition used informants, property confiscation, torture, and executions to root them out.
So, to survive, you had this massive exodus. These Sephardic Jews had to flee the Iberian Peninsula. And our sources show they primarily established diaspora networks in two distinct places, right? Amsterdam and the Caribbean.
Exactly. And those two locations are the exact geographic anchors of Juan Rodrigues' life. In Amsterdam, these refugees found a society that prioritized commerce over strict religious uniformity.
Which is why they went there.
Right. Prominent Portuguese Jewish families, with surnames like Rodrigues, Pinto, and Pereira, brought their massive capital and maritime knowledge with them. They were heavily financing the shipping networks that would basically launch the Dutch Golden Age.
While at the very same time, a huge contingent of refugees headed for the Caribbean. The historical analysis notes that roughly 10% of the population in Santo Domingo, which is the exact island where Juan was born, was legally categorized as Portuguese. And it was an open secret that many of these individuals were crypto-Jews who were running the transatlantic maritime supply lines. But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to challenge this narrative for a moment just so we can clearly understand the methodology here.
Okay, hit me.
A Dutch court document from 1614 says his father was Portuguese. Are historians just taking that one word on a dusty ledger and automatically assuming this guy had a secret Jewish identity? I mean, isn't that a massive analytical leap to make without concrete proof?
It sounds like it, but what's fascinating here is that historians aren't making a wild, baseless leap. They're engaging in a rigorous calculation of historical probability. You have to look at how these specific maritime networks actually operate.
Okay, so map it out for us.
Think about it. We have a sailor from Santo Domingo, a port where the quote-unquote Portuguese population is overwhelmingly comprised of hidden Sephardic Jews running shipping logistics. He has a Portuguese father. He ends up working as a highly skilled translator on Dutch trade ships sailing out of Amsterdam ships that, by the way, are heavily financed and organized by the Portuguese Jewish diaspora.
Okay. I see where you're going with this.
When you map all of those specific demographic and economic patterns on top of each other, the vectors all intersect at one point. It becomes highly historically plausible that Juan Rodrigues possessed Sephardic Jewish roots.
But the operative word you just used is plausible. It is incredibly plausible given the context, but it is not definitively proven.
That is correct. It's an important distinction. And distinguishing between the two is honestly the hardest part of working with ancient archives.
Because if we look strictly at the 1613 and 1614 court papers, they mention the nationality of his father, but they do not list his father's actual first name. They do not list a religion. We don't have, like, a secret journal where Juan writes about his faith, and there is no synagogue registry in Amsterdam with his name on it.
Right, the trail of hard evidence literally stops at the word Portuguese.
This forces us to navigate the boundary between academic history and dramatic storytelling, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If a historian writes a textbook and states, as a matter of absolute undeniable fact, that Juan Rodrigues' father was a secretly practicing Sephardic Jew, that historian has committed an overstatement.
They've gone too far.
Yeah, they have pushed the evidence further than the primary sources can formally support based purely on demographic trends. The burden of academic proof requires that missing puzzle piece.
But, as our sources point out, if a screenwriter or playwright takes these exact same historical facts and uses them to build a character's internal motivation, that is something completely different.
Right.
That represents grounded historical fiction operating at its absolute best.
It does, because it makes perfect thematic sense for the era. It takes two of the most defining survival narratives of the 17th century Atlantic world and weaves them into a single human life.
It's incredible to think about.
On one hand, you have African Creoles navigating the brutal emerging borders of colonialism and forced labor, relying on their wits and linguistic skills to maintain their freedom.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have Sephardic Jews navigating ruthless religious persecution, using commerce and diaspora networks to survive. It is entirely plausible that Juan Rodrigues was the heir to both of those survival legacies.
So what does this all mean? How should a listener actually process this kind of gap in the historical record?
The best way I can think to visualize it is like reading a heavily redacted government document.
Well, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Imagine you are doing forensic accounting on a CIA file. You have sentences where certain words are completely blacked out with a marker. The facts we know for sure are the visible word.
Stuff that isn't redacted.
Exactly. We know the ship was the young Tobias. We know the timeline of 1612 to 1613. We know the severance package was 80 hatchets. We can see the word Portuguese. The academic historian has to stop reading when they hit the blacked out word.
They can't guess. No, they can't. But a storyteller can look at the verb that comes before the redaction, the noun that comes after it, and the grammar of the entire paragraph, and logically deduce what that blacked out word most likely means. They are filling in the gap based on the surrounding context.
That's a perfect analogy. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Whether you are the strict historian refusing to guess the redacted word or the storyteller logically filling it in, the ultimate significance of Juan Rodrigues remains profoundly unchanged.
He still matters just as much.
Exactly. He is the ultimate embodiment of the 17th century Atlantic world. He wasn't just, a random sailor who missed his boat back to Europe. He was a walking, talking, multicultural crossroads.
Yeah.
He carried the heritage of West Africa. He utilized the languages of Spain and Portugal. He engaged in the aggressive commerce of the Dutch. And he ultimately embedded himself into the daily lived reality of the Munsee Lenape.
And realizing that completely shifts how you view the foundation of one of the world's greatest cities. Like you listening to this right now, think about why this story matters to your understanding of history today.
It changes everything.
It really does. We are constantly told that New York is the ultimate melting pot. But we're usually taught that the melting pot started much later, maybe with the great waves of immigration at Ellis Island in the late 1800s.
Right. That's the standard narrative.
But the existence of Juan Rodrigues proves that Manhattan was a multicultural, polyglot, internationally connected hub from the very first minute a non-native person decided to stay there.
Day one.
Day one. Long before the first brick of Wall Street was laid, long before the English sailed in and renamed the island New York, the blueprint of the city's identity was being drawn by a Dominican-born African-Portuguese linguist who refused to be commanded and demanded his worth in trade goods.
It's so powerful. And his life reminds us that the gaps in the historical archive, the missing names, the unrecorded faiths, the lost internal thoughts of these people, they shouldn't be viewed as a brick wall that frustrates our learning.
They aren't a dead end.
No, not at all. Those gaps are the exact space where the best, most complex human stories live. They force us to look closer, to truly understand the economic and political context of the world they lived in, and to read between the lines of the documents that actually survived.
Yeah.
Whether Juan Rodrigues was carrying a hidden family mezuzah in his coat, or whether he simply possessed the incredibly sharp, secular wits of a Caribbean trader trying to carve out a monopoly, his story fundamentally alters the timeline of American history.
It really makes you reconsider every neat and tidy historical narrative you were handed in grade school.
Yeah.
The next time you walk through a major city or you read a plaque about the quote-unquote founders of a place, I highly encourage you to ask yourself, who got left out of this paragraph?
I always ask that.
Who was doing the translating? Who was the person operating in the margins, speaking the languages, and refusing to get back on the boat when they were told to?
And that actually brings up a lingering, somewhat haunting thought from the historical analysis we reviewed today. Think about the sheer fragility of this knowledge.
Oh, man, yeah.
This entire saga, the existence of the very first non-native New Yorker, a man whose life perfectly encapsulates the Atlantic Creole experience, it only survived the ravages of time because of a random, petty, completely mundane notary deposition between two squabbling Dutch sea captains who were just mad about the price of beaver pelts.
It is so absurd when you put it like that.
If T.S. Mossel and Adrian Bloch hasn't sued each other in 1614, Juan Rodrigues might be completely lost to time. It forces you to wonder if this one boring lawsuit is the only reason we know about the founder of Manhattan's merchant culture. How many other incredible world-changing pioneers are currently buried in boring, untranslated 17th century notary ledgers, just waiting to be discovered?
Wow. How many other shattered myths and forgotten origin stories are sitting in some dusty, ink-stained box in an Amsterdam basement right now?
Probably thousands.
It really makes that traditional buckled hat look pretty lifeless in comparison. Keep questioning the history you've been handed, and keep looking for the context hidden between the lines. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.